Chapter 1. The Arrival. The world outside the car windows was a tapestry of autumn hues. Golds, oranges, and deep crimsons, dappled by the fleeting sun as Emily and Mark drove through the meandering country road. Their laughter filled the cabin of the car, a sweet harmony that banished the ghosts of the stressful city life they had left miles behind. "Can you believe we found this place, Em?" Mark asked, his eyes momentarily flitting from the road to meet hers. "It's like a dream," she replied, a soft smile gracing her lips. A moment later, the car rolled into a clearing, and the cabin appeared before them, quaint yet inviting, as if it had sprouted naturally from the earth. Its wooden walls were weathered but well kept, surrounded by a sea of fallen leaves that danced in the wind. Mark pulled the car to a halt. "We're here," he announced, as if the cabin wasn't evidence enough. Emily felt an inexplicable tug in her gut as they stepped out of the car. It was like the air around the cabin was denser, a thickness that wasn't entirely oppressive but hinted at hidden layers of existence. Ignoring the feeling, they carried their bags inside. The interior was as charming as the exterior, filled with rustic furniture and a flickering hearth that invited them to relax. "Let's get this fire going, shall we?" Mark suggested, grabbing a few logs from the stack near the fireplace. Emily nodded, her eyes momentarily drawn to a peculiar painting above the mantelpiece. It depicted a dense forest bathed in eerie twilight. But there was something unsettling about the way the trees seemed to lean inwards, as if conspiring in whispered secrets. Mark struck a match and the fire roared to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls that seemed to blend seamlessly with the twilight sinking outside their windows. "Finally, some peace," Emily sighed as she cuddled next to Mark on the worn but comfortable sofa. He kissed the top of her head. "No work, no calls, just us and the serenity we've been craving." As nightfall descended, an owl hooted in the distance, its call echoing through the woods. A few other night creatures added their voices to the nocturnal choir, but amid these natural sounds, another noise hummed. A low, almost imperceptible whisper, like wind caressing the leaves, barely loud enough for human ears. Mark and Emily shared a glance. "Did you hear that?" he asked, an undercurrent of curiosity woven into his voice. She shook her head slightly, dispelling the growing sense of unease. "It's just the wind. It's always louder in the woods." "Right," Mark agreed, though his eyes remained thoughtful. They retreated to the warmth of the crackling fire, pulling a blanket over them as the world outside darkened completely. Mark picked up a book, and Emily rested her head on his shoulder, lulled by the rhythmic sounds of turning pages and the pop and crackle of burning logs. But as they settled into their serene haven, both remained blissfully unaware of the invisible threads of time and fate slowly winding around them, preparing to pull tight in a deadly snare. The cabin, for all its rustic allure, held a secret. And secrets, as Emily and Mark would soon learn, have a way of unfurling in the darkest of nights. They were here. The loop was set, and the countdown to terror had begun. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying these spine-chilling stories, do me a favor. Hit that like button and smash subscribe. It helps to keep the horrors coming your way. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a scare. Thanks for watching. Chapter 2. First Night. Night enveloped the cabin, wrapping it in an inky shroud punctuated only by the shimmering glow of the fireplace. Emily felt the weight of a work-filled year lift off her shoulders. Mark, sitting beside her, seemed equally at ease, lost in the fictional world contained within the book he was reading. "Want some wine?" she asked, lifting her eyes to meet his. "Absolutely," he replied, placing a bookmark in his book and setting it down on the coffee table. She moved gracefully to the small kitchen area, pulled out a bottle of red wine and poured 2 glasses. As the liquid splashed into the glass, the cabin's wooden walls seemed to absorb the sound, as if drinking it in. Returning to the living room, she handed Mark a glass and settled back into her cozy spot beside him. They clinked their glasses together, a crystal-clear sound that rang truer than any they'd heard in recent times. To us, Mark toasted. To us, she echoed. They sipped their wine, allowing the rich flavors to dance on their tongues as the fire continued to blaze, casting a golden halo around them. For a long moment, everything was perfect. And then, just as Emily was about to suggest they retire for the night, it happened. The soft but distinct rustle of leaves outside, followed by an unsettling noise that neither could place. It was a hollow sound, like wind blowing through a narrow tunnel but tinged with something darker. Mark stiffened. That wasn't the wind. No, Emily agreed, her eyes widening. It wasn't. Compelled by a sense of dread they couldn't quite articulate, both rose from the couch and moved toward the window. Mark parted the curtains cautiously, peering into the obsidian abyss that was the forest at night. But the darkness revealed nothing. I don't see anything, he said, a puzzled frown on his face. Neither do I, but I definitely heard something, Emily whispered, her voice tinged with unease. We're just not used to the sounds of the forest at night, Mark rationalized, attempting to dispel the tension. Every little noise is going to seem louder and stranger. You're probably right, Emily agreed, though the knot in her stomach told her otherwise. They returned to the couch, but the atmosphere had changed. The comforting aura of the cabin felt tainted, as if the very walls had absorbed the unease that now hung between them. Neither mentioned it, but both felt it. A disquiet that hadn't been there before, settling over them like an unwelcome guest. Mark stoked the fire one last time, sending a flurry of sparks pirouetting into the air. The flames rose higher, as if attempting to fend off the invisible presence that had invaded their sanctuary. Let's go to bed, Emily suggested, her voice softer now, almost fragile. Mark nodded. Yeah, let's. They secured the cabin, double-checking the locks on the doors and windows, an act that felt suddenly more significant than it should have. As they retreated to the bedroom, each was preoccupied by their own swirling thoughts, but both chose to keep them locked away, unspoken. They climbed into bed, the rustic quilt pulled tightly around them. A kiss was exchanged, a brief but heartfelt connection in the burgeoning darkness. Good night, Em, Mark whispered. Good night, she replied. And so they closed their eyes, each drifting toward sleep, unaware that the night was far from over, and that the first unsettling events were mere whispers of the horror that awaited them. Chapter 3. Déjà vu. The darkness that veiled the bedroom was almost palpable, pressing against the closed eyelids of the couple as they nestled deeper under the quilt. The minutes ticked away, replaced by the stretching hours of the first night in their woodland escape. It was Mark who heard it first, a low, mournful wail that seemed to rise up from the bowels of the earth itself. His eyes snapped open, pupils dilating as he tried to make sense of the sound. It was different from before, lacking any resemblance to wind or nocturnal creatures. It was something else, something unnatural. Beside him, Emily stirred, her sleep shattered by the same noise. Did you hear that? She breathed, her voice tinged with a fear that cut through the darkness. Yes, Mark replied, sitting upright, his ears straining to catch any further anomalies in the nocturnal soundscape. Suddenly, the door to the bedroom creaked open with agonizing slowness. The couple froze, their breaths hitching in their throats. They hadn't locked it, assuming the isolation of the cabin precluded the need for such precautions, a decision they now silently regretted. The door stopped moving, but what replaced the sound of its movement was far worse. A guttural growl, low and vibrating, seemed to issue forth from the blackened hallway beyond. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence, malevolent and hungry, invading the room and the spaces in their minds where terror resided. Mark instinctively reached for the bedside lamp, his fingers fumbling for the switch. The room burst into light, banishing the shadows to the corners and edges, but revealing nothing at the doorway. It was empty. What was that? Emily stammered, her eyes wide and searching, darting from the door to Mark and back again. I don't know, but I'm going to find out, Mark declared, his voice threaded with a resolve he was far from feeling. He rose from the bed, pulling on a pair of jeans and a sweater. Emily, not willing to be left alone, did the same, donning her own clothes in hurried, shaky movements. Together, they stepped out into the hallway, Mark leading the way, his hand tightly gripping a fireplace poker he had grabbed as they left the bedroom. The cabin was a different entity at night, its warm wooden walls seeming to close in, taking on a menacing air. The portraits on the walls, natural scenes of forests and skies, now appeared almost sinister, as if the trees in those frozen images were witnesses to secrets too horrific to share. They searched every room, every potential hiding spot. The small bathroom with its clawfoot tub, the cozy kitchen where the unwashed wine glasses still sat, the living room where the dying embers of the fire offered little warmth. They found nothing, and yet the atmosphere was thick with an unnamed dread. "It's like we're not alone," Emily finally said, voicing what both were feeling but neither wanted to admit. "Yeah," Mark agreed, his eyes meeting hers. Exactly like that. And then, as they stood there, enveloped by an unsettling silence, they heard it, the soft tick-tock of a clock, coming from somewhere within the cabin. Only, there was no clock, at least none that they had seen. Before they could ponder this further, a voice erupted from behind them, a whisper yet deafening in its clarity. "Time's up!" Whirling around, they were met with a sight too horrifying to comprehend. An entity, a figure made of darkness, its form constantly shifting, stood at the threshold of the hallway. It had no face, yet they could feel its eyes on them penetrating their souls. There was no time to scream, no time to run. The entity lunged forward, engulfing them in its abyssal form. A ripping sensation tore through them, both physical and metaphysical, as if their very beings were being shredded apart. Then, blackness, a void where not even thoughts could exist. When consciousness returned, they found themselves back in bed, as if waking from a nightmare. Both sat up, staring at each other with eyes widened in terror. Except it was morning, and the sunlight was streaming through the gaps in the curtains, casting its golden glow over everything, as if the horrors of the night had been nothing but a shared illusion. They were back where they started, only now they realized that the nightmare was far from over. The loop had closed, and it was about to begin again. Little did they know that understanding the nature of their entrapment was the first piece in solving a cosmic puzzle, one that spiraled through the dimensions of time and space, and one that they had no choice but to complete. If they ever wanted to escape, they had to play the game, a game that had rules written in the fabric of the universe, and penalties worse than death. And so, the countdown reset, leaving them to face the day, and the terrors it would undoubtedly bring all over again. Chapter 4. The Unraveling. The morning light seemed to mock them, illuminating a world so contrasting to the one they had just experienced. Could it all have been a dream? A bizarre, shared hallucination? Neither spoke as they dressed and left the bedroom, each immersed in their own thoughts. "I'm going to make some coffee," Emily said, more to break the silence than out of any desire for caffeine. Mark nodded absent-mindedly. "Yeah, that sounds good." As the coffee brewed, filling the cabin with its rich aroma, Mark walked to the fireplace and poked at the cold ashes from last night's fire. He glanced up at the painting that had caught Emily's eye the day before. Now, in the daylight, the eerie forest scene seemed almost benign. Almost. Emily handed him a steaming mug, and they sat down at the small kitchen table, where a momentary silence fell between them. "We need to talk about last night," Emily finally said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "I know," Mark agreed, his grip tightening on his mug. "It was real, Em. I know it was real." "But it's impossible," she argued, though her voice lacked conviction. "People don't just loop. We don't wake up in the same day after whatever that was." "It happened," he insisted, We can't just ignore it. Emily sighed, her eyes meeting his. So what do we do? Before he could answer, a knock echoed through the cabin, startling them both. They exchanged a puzzled glance. Visitors were the last thing they expected here. Cautiously, Mark opened the door. A man stood on the threshold, in his early 50s perhaps, dressed in rugged outdoor clothing. He had a weather-beaten face that looked like it had seen years of sun and wind, and his eyes were a piercing blue that almost seemed to glow. "Morning," he greeted, his voice gravelly but not unfriendly. "Name's Jack. I live about a mile down the road. Thought I'd come over and welcome you folks." Hi," Mark replied, a bit taken aback. "I'm Mark, and this is Emily." "Pleasure," Jack said, nodding towards Emily, who had come to stand beside Mark. "Mind if I come in?" "Sure," Mark said hesitantly, stepping aside to let the man enter. Once inside, Jack looked around approvingly. "Nice place you got here," he commented. "Been vacant for a while." "We were lucky to find it," Emily said, trying to inject some normalcy into the conversation. "Ah, luck," Jack mused, his eyes momentarily clouding over. "Interesting thing, luck. Sometimes it's hard to tell if you have good luck or bad." An uneasy silence fell over the room, as both Mark and Emily felt a growing sense of discomfort. There was something off about this man, something they couldn't quite put their finger on. Jack finally broke the silence. "I've lived around these parts for years," he began, his gaze meeting theirs. "And there are things in these woods. Things most people don't understand. Can't understand." "Things like what?" Mark asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. Jack leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a near whisper. "There are loops in time and space out here, folds in reality where the rules you're used to don't apply. You ever feel like you've experienced the same moment more than once?" Mark and Emily exchanged a look, their hearts sinking as they realized the implications of Jack's words. "You might say you're not the first to rent this cabin," Jack continued, his eyes now like twin flames in the dim light. "But I sure hope you'll be the first to leave it." As he spoke, the walls seemed to close in around them, as though the cabin itself was reacting to his words. And in that moment, they knew the horrors of last night were far from over. Their reality was coming undone, and the threads were being pulled by forces beyond their comprehension. "Remember, in a place like this," Jack added ominously as he headed for the door, "survival is a loop. Break it, and you just might get out." And then he was gone, leaving Mark and Emily in a cabin that suddenly felt like a trap set across dimensions. With a growing sense of dread, they realized that their fight for survival was not just against unknown forces, but against the unraveling fabric of reality itself. Could they break the loop? Or were they doomed to relive their nightmare over and over for all eternity? As the gravity of their situation set in, they knew they had no choice but to try. And so, with time perhaps looping or running out, they steeled themselves for the unimaginable horrors that awaited them. As Jack had said, survival was a loop. The question now was, how could they break it? Chapter 5. Riddles in the Dark. Their morning encounter with Jack left Emily and Mark unnerved, but also determined. If this stranger, a local no less, knew something about their situation, then there had to be a way out. "Let's check the cabin, every inch of it," Emily suggested. "If there's a loop, a bend in reality or whatever, maybe there's a clue on how to break it." Mark nodded. "I agree. Let's start in the basement." Armed with flashlights, they cautiously descended into the dark, musty space below the cabin. Old furniture, tools, and miscellaneous objects were scattered around, covered in a layer of grime and dust. As they scoured the room, Mark's flashlight beam landed on an old bookshelf crammed with books and faded photographs. One photo caught his eye, an old black-and-white image of the cabin, but in the window there was a blurred figure, almost like a shadow. "Look at this," he called Emily over. Her eyes widened as she saw the image. "That looks like... It can't be, can it?" She looked both intrigued and horrified. "It's similar to what we saw last night," Mark confirmed. "This loop, this entity, it's old. It's been here a long time." Their search also revealed a dusty journal, its pages yellowed with age. The entries were written in a shaky hand and dated back decades. Skimming through it, Emily found repeated mentions of time loops, strange occurrences, and a dark presence. One passage stood out. "To break the loop, you must solve the riddle of the three. Only then can the trapped be free." "What do you think it means?" Mark looked at Emily, his eyes searching for answers she didn't have. "I have no idea, but it's a start." They spent the rest of the day searching for these mysterious three, whatever they were. Hours passed with no revelations, and frustration began to set in. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and red, Emily suggested they take a break. "We've been at this for hours. Maybe we need to approach it differently." Mark nodded, his eyes tired but resolute. "You're right. Let's take a walk. Clear our heads." They stepped outside, their breaths visible in the cool evening air. But they weren't alone. The forest seemed to come alive in the twilight, its noises a symphony of hidden lives and echoing footsteps. "Wait," Emily stopped, a realization dawning on her. "The three. What if they aren't things, but moments? Remember the journal. To break the loop, you must solve the riddle of the three." Mark looked at her, intrigued. "Go on." "Three significant moments or occurrences that we experience within the loop. Maybe acknowledging them or solving them somehow breaks it." As if on cue, a guttural growl echoed through the woods, chilling them to their cores. It was a familiar sound, one that triggered memories of the night before, their first night in this twisted loop. "That's one," Mark whispered, his voice tinged with both fear and a newfound sense of purpose. Suddenly, the world around them seemed to shimmer, like a mirage. It was subtle, but they both felt it. A shift, a weakening in the fabric of the loop that had ensnared them. "We're on to something," Emily said, her voice tinged with a hope they hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. But as they made their way back to the cabin, a second realization hit them. If they were right, if they had indeed identified one of the three moments, then solving the riddle meant they had to confront the other two. And as the cabin door creaked open before them, inviting them back into its labyrinth of uncertainties, they knew that their battle against time, against reality, was far from over. "Two more to go," Mark said, looking into Emily's eyes. Emily nodded, her grip tightening on his hand. Two more. Their ordeal was not yet over, but for the first time, the maze they were trapped in seemed to have an exit, even if that exit was guarded by terrors they could scarcely imagine. With renewed determination, they stepped inside, ready to face whatever awaited them in the unraveling reality of the cabin in the woods. Chapter 6: The Second Moment. As they crossed the threshold back into the cabin, Emily and Mark felt a curious sensation, like the tingling of static electricity, but deeper, more internal. It was as if the cabin itself acknowledged their return, and not in a welcoming manner. "I can't shake the feeling that the cabin doesn't want us to break the loop," Emily said, her voice edged with anxiety. "That's because it probably doesn't," Mark responded, taking a slow scan of the living room. "But we have no choice." They knew they were hunting for two more pivotal moments, clues or experiences that would allow them to crack the riddle of their entrapment. But what form would these moments take? They had scant time to ponder this when a sudden knock resounded on the door. Startled, Mark moved cautiously to the door and peered through the peephole. Standing outside was Jack, just as they remembered him, down to the piercing blue eyes. "Should we open it?" Emily whispered. Mark hesitated for a moment before unbolting the door and letting it swing open. Jack stepped inside, his gaze flickering briefly around the room before settling on them. "Making progress, are we?" he asked, a wry smile curling his lips. "We might be," Emily answered cautiously. "We found something in a journal downstairs about solving the riddle of the three." We think we've identified one moment. Jack's eyebrows lifted, and for the first time his composed demeanor seemed to falter. Ah, the journal. It's been a long time since anyone mentioned that. Well, don't get too comfortable just yet. His words were ominous, but they also filled the couple with a sense of urgency. This was their second moment, they realized. Jack's unexpected return was not a coincidence. What do you know about breaking the loop? Mark pressed, his patience wearing thin. Jack sighed. In each loop there are focal points, moments that act like anchors. Identifying them weakens the loop, but you must also act upon them. Simply recognizing them won't be enough. And how do we act upon them? Emily asked. That, Jack paused, is for you to figure out. Each loop is personal, a prison tailored to its occupants. With that, he made his way to the door. Remember, the cabin doesn't like to lose. Be prepared for anything. As the door closed behind him, Mark and Emily were left in contemplative silence. His visit was brief but enlightening, and they sensed that they had tipped another scale in their favor. The second moment had been identified, but what action were they to take? The focal points are like anchors, he said. Emily murmured. What if we need to physically alter them or disrupt them in some way? Mark considered this. Maybe we can start by removing that painting, the one with the figure that looks like the entity we saw. They moved into the living room, standing in front of the painting that had caught their attention since their arrival. Tentatively, Mark lifted it off its hook and set it face down on the floor. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a loud crack splintered the air, and they watched in awe as a hairline fracture appeared on the wall where the painting had hung. Did we just... Emily started, her voice tinged with disbelief. I think so. Mark nodded, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. We acted upon the second moment. We altered its anchor. The atmosphere within the cabin shifted perceptibly. The space around them seemed to quiver, like a mirage dissipating in the heat. They had destabilized another part of the loop, and the effect was almost palpable. But that leaves one more, Emily said softly, her words heavy with both hope and dread. One more, Mark agreed, and I have a feeling it's not going to be easy. They had come a long way, but the path ahead was still veiled in shadow. They braced themselves for whatever would come next, united in their determination to break free from the spiraling snare of time and space that had entrapped them. Both knew that the final moment was near, and with it would come their ultimate test. Would it be the key to their escape, or the lock that sealed their fate forever? Time, endlessly looping yet ever so scarce, would tell. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. As the night wore on, Emily and Mark found themselves wrought with a heightened sense of awareness. They had come so far, overcoming obstacles both within and outside themselves. Now, only one moment remained. The last anchor, the final key to their freedom. We need to be prepared, Emily said, picking up a kitchen knife. Whatever this last moment is, it's not going to come quietly. You're right, Mark agreed, grabbing a flashlight. We'll face it together. Just then, the cabin seemed to groan in disapproval, the walls vibrating as if in response to their newfound courage. Items from the bookshelf rattled, and the lights flickered ominously. Do you feel that? Mark's voice was a whisper. It's like the cabin itself is reacting to us. Because it is, Emily replied. We're close to breaking the loop, and it knows. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, a chill that penetrated to the bone. Then a voice, ethereal and distorted, echoed through the cabin, filling the space with its haunting tone. Why do you resist? Why not embrace the loop? Both Emily and Mark knew, without a doubt, that this was their final moment. The entity behind the loop was making its stand. We're not staying, Emily shouted back, her voice tinged with defiance. We're breaking this loop. The entity laughed, a sound that sent shivers down their spines. Then come find me. Knowing they had little choice, Emily and Mark ventured down to the basement, the heart of the cabin, and, they suspected, the lair of the entity. The atmosphere was dense, oppressive, as if the very air sought to suffocate them. In the center of the basement, they found it. A swirling vortex of darkness, pulsating with a menacing energy. They felt it trying to pull them in, to ensnare them in its loop for all eternity. "Do we go in?" Mark asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. "We have to," Emily said, gripping her knife tightly. "It's the only way to end this." Together, they stepped into the vortex. For a moment, they were enveloped in utter darkness, their senses overwhelmed. But then they emerged, finding themselves back in the basement, standing before the entity, a shadowy figure, vaguely humanoid, its form ever-changing. "Your courage is admirable," it spoke, "but futile. You cannot break the loop." Emily looked at Mark, then back at the entity. A realization dawned upon her. The loop is your doing, but it's also your prison, isn't it? You're just as stuck as we are. The entity hesitated, its form flickering. "What are you saying?" "We're saying," Mark stepped forward, "that we can break the loop, but maybe we can free you as well." For a moment, the entity seemed to consider this. "How?" "By acknowledging you. By understanding the pain that binds you," Emily said softly. "You don't have to be a prisoner either." With that realization, the room brightened, and the entity's form seemed to lighten, its dark hues fading into softer shades. Then, with a sigh that sounded almost like relief, it dissipated, leaving only a mist that was quickly absorbed into the walls of the basement. Suddenly, the oppressive air lifted, replaced by a sense of tranquility. Emily and Mark felt a weight lift off their shoulders as they realized that they had done it. They had broken the loop, and perhaps freed an anguished soul in the process. "We did it," Emily said, tears of relief in her eyes. "We did," Mark echoed, embracing her tightly. As they made their way up to the main floor, the cabin seemed to sigh, its timbers creaking as if in gratitude. When they opened the front door, they were greeted by the morning light, its rays shining more brilliantly than they had ever seen before. Hand in hand, Emily and Mark stepped outside, leaving the cabin and its loop behind. It was a new day, a new beginning, and as they looked at each other, they knew that the experience had changed them, binding them in a way that nothing else could. "Ready for the next adventure?" Mark asked, his eyes meeting Emily's. "More ready than ever," she replied. And with that, they walked away from the cabin, their steps light, their hearts unburdened, ready to face whatever came their way. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the future was theirs to write, and it was a future they both looked forward to with eager anticipation. The end.